Interview number one with our amazing system designer. So please introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, my name is Joe Graves. I am the lead systems designer on the Crossfire project at Starbreeze. And I'm looking forward to talking to you guys today about whatever he asks me.
Should be fun. So what's the system designers? What do you guys do?
Systems designers are the people who build the basic mechanics and foundations of play. So the best example I can give is something like in Mario. The systems designer comes up with how high Mario jumps, how quickly he turns around, how fast he runs, and then the level designers utilize those numbers to build the levels. So you kind of need the underpinnings of the system, of the structure, to build the levels around those rules. So systems designer would say something like, a Goomba can be jumped on from the top, but you die if you hit them from the side. And fireballs fire at this angle and they bounce this number of times before disappearing. So your job is to try to create an interesting rule space that the rest of the designers and the rest of the team can utilize to create interesting gameplay decisions for the players.
Cool. So how many parts in the design side? Like there's level designers and system designers. Or what else? Normally, just.
I mean, it depends on the company, honestly. Design is one of those weird things that kind of got layered on top during the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Like originally there was no such thing as a designer.
Yeah.
It was you were a programmer or an artist.
Or just say that you're a designer, so you need to do something like that.
Right,
not
right.
The specific part.
I mean, as games kind of came into their own in the 80s and 90s, design became its own format. But before that, you were just an engineer, and you would make whatever you wanted, right? You were just like, I'm gonna code my game like Centipede was coded and built and designed, and all the quote art was done by one guy.
Because I'm gonna make the AI, I'm gonna make the gun, I'm gonna make the systems.
And this is how it all worked. So before it was kind of everything was done by one or two people, and then as games got a little more complicated and got better budgets, and as people started realizing that this is a real thing and that people want to pay for it and there's a market there, the specializations broke out at first into engineering and art. And then because engineers are not generally great artists, and so if you want to have something that looks nice, you probably want to hire someone who's good at that. And then designers came in on top. We're kind of this third layer on top of the cake, the most unnecessary piece of the puzzle, which is
not every time,
not every time, but I mean we're sort of this late addition to the process where. We're almost the architect of things, and so I think that came about slowly. And originally, you had someone who was almost the vision holder for a game, right? A designer usually it was rolled into the engineering part of it initially, but then maybe an engineer one day was like, "Hey, maybe I would rather just implement this other thing." And maybe someone else is going to be clever in their way of building rule sets and levels and things that I don't want to deal with. I just want to make it run well, right? And so they got a designer to come in. And so initially you had these sort of big name Sid Meier designers that were more like creative vision holders for the process than they were in the nuts and bolts of every day. But now it's become a little more stratified. So you have systems designers and level designers, and depending on the genre of game, you can have.
What about the scenario?
There are scenario designers. There are, if you look at like MMOs, there are sort of like combat encounter designers. It really depends on the genre and on the company.
AI?
Yeah, there are specific AI designers. I mean, I think when you get out into a company of 300 or 400 people, it's easy to specialize people. You can hire someone for a very specific role. I mean, there's even economy designers, like in mobile. There are people who just build mobile economies, right? Their entire job is to look at the data coming in and to say, how do we get people to spend more money, right? Like their whole job is to design this. There's onboarding designers. I mean, I think that those are rare. I don't think there's a ton of those people out there, but you will find very, very specific styles of design in larger companies, I think. And the smaller the company, the more general purpose the designer is. You'll have like a lead design or a game designer in a more general, broad way. And those guys we call them vision holders. That's the guy where, hopefully, ideally, they have a very clear vision of what they want the game to do. And so then the other designers sort of report to them and they say, hey, how should our gun work? and hopefully this person who is your main creative lead, your game designer, your creative director, has a clear idea of how they want the guns to work or how they want things to feel. And so it's their job to sort of suss out the broad strategy for the game and then to give direction to people that are building the more specific pieces of it.
So there's still a lot of parts in design.
Yeah, there are. There can be, but it can be as simple as just,
Yeah.
you know, I'm the game designer and I'm also the programmer and I'm also the artist. Like Stardew Valley was one guy.
Yeah.
He made everything. Like,
Yeah.
every asset was just that guy.
Because the reason I'm asking, in South Korea, we're just telling them, you are designers. You guys are designers, they're lead designers, then that's it. No matter what. So that's what I'm asking.
Okay. Yeah. I would say it's maybe a little different. And you know, most of my experience comes from the United States. So this is my first company overseas. I haven't worked in Europe before. So maybe
Me neither.
Yeah, I mean it's actually, and it's different at Starbreeze too. Like at Starbreeze, I'm used to having I guess creative director or game director. Like that's a job.
Back in US?
Yeah, back in the U.S., like a BioWare, you know, James Olin was the
Yeah,
creative director at BioWare in Austin for the Old Republic. And at Starbreeze, they're more production driven. So I think the producers at Starbreeze sort of take on the role that would generally be given to what we call like a lead designer or like a game designer at
For almost everything,
at a different company, which is, you know, it's interesting. It's a cool change. It's something that's different from what I'm used to, where it's more production focused. They're looking more at like cost benefit and scheduling. That's just more important to them. And it really shows in the quality of life at the studio, right? Like in American companies, the hours are generally worse, right? Like I mean, this is a broad generalization and it really depends on the company. I'm not trying to call anybody out, but there's a culture in the US in game companies of people just kind of working you to the bone. Like if you're not there on weekends, if you're not there at 11 p.m., people, like, you'll get a bad reputation as like a lazy, you know, you're like, oh, he wasn't here.
You were saying back in South Korea, you need to be here by 10 or 9. Then
like
if you're late, you get a bad reputation for everyone.
Yeah, there have been companies that I've worked at where if you, especially when there was a milestone coming up or there was, you know, crunch is pretty big there. It's this like work hard, play hard stuff that everybody touts. And especially as I've gotten older, you know, it's something that, when you're 21, absolutely, I'll be here on the weekend. Sure, I'll be here till 11 at night every night. Like I'm following my dream. I got my passion. But I think as you get a little older, it's you start to understand there's
I need to go home.
I need to go home. I need to take care of my family. I need to I want to have a garden or a dog or something.
Watch
right?
movie, something. Everything.
So I think it's interesting to see that difference. Just sort of that one change to management style can, if you're more focused on production than you are on, you know, other things, or if that's a priority, then you're going to have a better schedule, which means that you can let people go home at 5 because you know how much work they're getting. Right? I think everything kind of snowballs from the top. So it's
like we normally do.
I think it's interesting to see it. It's been really cool working here and seeing that.
All right, so sounds good. And how do you become a game designer? And why are you developing games? It's going to be simple and complicated.
How did I get here and why did I get here? Well, how was I went to a graduate program called SMU Guildhall, which is a
special school for...
it's a little grad school that's based in Plano, Texas, and it's an affiliate school of Southern Methodist University. So SMU is a pretty well-regarded like Southern university in the U.S., and then they started a little video games program, I don't know, it must have been over 10 years ago now. But they started it very, very small, and it was a graduate program focused on training people specifically for careers in games. And so they got some luminaries and distinguished people from the games industry who wanted to teach, and they developed a program around it and tried to teach basic skill sets.
How to make really simple games.
And so there's different tracks at Guildhall, and I think they might even have production now. That wasn't there when I was there. But the different tracks when I went were level design, engineering, and art. So you would apply to the grad school for one of those tracks. So if you wanted to be an artist, you'd apply art, engineering. So I applied for the level design track, and I got in. I don't know how. When I look back on my paper designs that I literally just drew levels on grids on graph paper, and I don't know why they let me in, but they did. And then I worked really, really hard and felt like
I felt like I was going to
die. It was like
Behind the company.
You just very little sleep, a lot. Just I think part of their program at the time, there was a little bit of experimentation going on with the schedule and the syllabus, like for our cohort specifically. But I think they also were trying to give you a good, accurate feeling of this is how it is to crunch, right? This is what the game industry does a lot of the time. Is there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of time constraints, and so part of it was we're just going to overwhelm you with all these things you have to do and see how you function in a team, in a creative team environment when you're under a lot of stress. And so there were people that were better at that and worse at that. I wouldn't say I was great at it, but at least I didn't freak out and quit. So I think that was.
I said you were great, yeah.
I mean, there were quite a few casualties of the schedule at Guild. I mean, my starting class was something like 80 people, and by the end of a 2-year program, we had 30 left or something. I mean, it was more than 50% dropped out.
Yeah.
So it was pretty intense. So that's kind of the how. And then from there, I went to work at Biowear and Vigil and various companies around the U.S. Started off at the lowest level design position at Biowear. I helped them with the Old Republic, and that was sort of my first game industry job. I was super excited, but there were just tons of us because it was a massive project and they needed a ton of stuff done in a very short amount of time. So they just kind of drove the van up to Guildhall and we're like, hey, hey guys, are any of you any good? Great, come help us build this MMO. So I cut my teeth on MMO stuff, which was a lot of fun. And then I actually transitioned over to Vigil because they had an entry-level systems position open, and I'd been doing level design for Old Republic.
You did a lot of things.
Yeah, I was doing quest design and map layout and just whatever they needed me to do for the planets. I was in charge of a few of the Sith quest chains on different worlds.
I did almost everything.
Well, I mean, I had a very specific role to play. I was one of many people involved. It wasn't really my jurisdiction, but it was interesting to be able to do a lot of different stuff there, right? Like it was great to be able to touch a lot of the different parts of the process. Yeah, it was awesome. But then a friend of mine at Vigil told me that they were hiring for a entry-level systems job, and entry-level systems is a pretty rare beast as far as I can see. Like entry-level jobs in general, most people don't hire for them. There's Starbreeze is having this internship stuff, which is awesome. I don't see a lot of companies that do like a regular internship process.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so I think it's interesting to see that from the other side. But at the time, getting in on the ground floor of doing systems work that just never came up. All the systems jobs I saw were senior, they're looking for people to help them build a specific thing. They're not looking to train somebody, right? So when an entry-level position came up, I jumped at it. And then I got to work with a very great designer. His name was Mike Burkhead. He did a lot of this stuff for, I think, Mortal Kombat back in the day. Great designer, really smart guy. And he was sort of my lead there, him and another guy named Mike Lynn. Really great people at Vigil. And so I got to work on a pretty small systems team, and I was the new guy. I didn't know what I was doing, and so they just...
So I guess you learned a lot from that, right?
Yeah. So they just kind of turned me loose on... Because I've been working on MMO stuff, because I played a lot of MMOs when I was younger, they just kind of... I was working on a Warhammer 40k MMO that never got released, unfortunately. It was unfortunate. It was really great. It was a lot of fun. But they had it was going to be orcs versus Imperials versus Eldar. I think were going to be the 3 playable races.
Yeah, Warhammer franchise. Yeah.
And so they had a lot of the Empire, a lot of the human stuff done. That was what they made first. And the Eldar, I think they were starting to work on some of it, but the orcs were just, they had a couple models, but there was nothing. They just hadn't gotten to that part of the game yet. So they turned me loose on all of the orc weapons, and they were just like, hey, go, just show us, just build some stuff. Let us know what you're doing. You can get used to the systems. You can cut your teeth on it. And so it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with it. But it was just nice to have people who knew what they were doing, who were willing to let me learn on it. And so that's kind of where I got my start. and then I've been slowly, working from there.
So, and why?
Why
are you developing games? Just a simple question. You need to answer this very simply,
It's because I grew up playing them, and they occupied a big part of my emotional and mental space as a kid. It was something that I loved, and that when I was a kid and I was playing games, I wanted to make them. That was what I wanted to do. That was my equivalent of my dream job. And so, when you're a kid, you think that you can do whatever you want. It's going to be awesome. And then you go to college and you're like, okay, it's time for a real career. I can't, there's no obvious way in. So it was actually much later in my life that I came into the game industry, but it's something I always wanted to do, something that I always loved.
So you love to play the game and also love to make the game, right?
Yeah.
Basically, everyone says the same.
Yes, everyone has the same story.
We're here doing stuff.
Yes.
All right. All right. What do you think about the loot boxes for not just for the mobiles and online and everything?
Loot boxes I'm not a big fan of them, and I know that there's a lot of ways of thinking, and I know that there are arguments that can be made for asymmetrical funding of video games, and there are a lot of economic arguments you can make to say that the costs of AAA production have gone way up, and the price of AAA games has not kept pace. Mm-hmm. And so to keep these big teams alive, you're going to need some alternate revenue that comes in from your games. There's a big push toward games as a service now. So I can understand the reasons for them. I don't have like a fundamental disagreement on the economics of it. Mm-hmm. But I think that they're really easily exploitable. The thing I find gross about loot boxes, the thing I don't like about them, is that they hack into a very primal and hard to change piece of human wetware architecture, right? Yeah. The human brain is really easily swayed by what's called a variable reward schedule. And you can see this in all mammal reward centers, right? Like it works on rats, it works on everything. If you have a reward that happens as a result of a certain action, that's a less desirable reward in terms of the chemicals released into your brain, dopamine, that kind of thing. It's less desirable than a reward that happens on a random basis. This is why gambling is so popular and so addictive. Yeah. This is it's those same fundamental hacks.
That's why they pay more taxes.
Yes. So I think finding alternate revenue streams is good, and allowing people to pay what they feel is fair for a game is interesting, and I think that plays into fundamental economics very well. But I think that loot boxes as a model are a bad direction to take, because it relies on the developer being really conscientious about how they use them. If a developer is unscrupulous in how they use that system, they've essentially created a gambling system for their game. Which can entice people to spend way more money than they should. And I guess "should" is a weird word. But,
should is weird. Yeah,
but at the same time, like you're hijacking a piece of the brain's reward architecture that is very powerful. And I think that there are ways to do this in a game that are fine, and there are ways that are not fine. And the ways that are fine don't involve hitting you in the wallet every time you want that dopamine hit, right? Like if you look at loot tables, right? Loot tables are the same thing. But a loot table requires dedication and time and patience, and like a loot table is basically extending the lifetime of someone's interest in your game, as opposed to allowing them to gamble for in-game items with real money. And so I think it's a little, when you're faced with when you're faced with the repercussions of it in the real world, I think it's really easy for developers to go down the wrong road on it. And when you start looking at the profits that you're making, I think it's easy for even very good and very well-intentioned people to be swayed by the amount of money that you can bring in for your studio. So even if it's not something that's greed-based, even if it's just, I want to keep hiring all these people that I enjoy, if I'm someone who runs a studio and I care about all my employees, and I find a way to allow us to be independent of publishers and make games that we love and pay people really well. Like once you see those revenue streams coming in, I think it's really difficult to disengage yourself from it emotionally. And so I think it's a trap both on the development side and on the player side.
Trap is a good word.
And so I think it's hard to resist. It's bad. I think we should explore other ways of funding our studios.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking, I'm going to explain to you what happened in South Korea, especially East Asia.
Yeah.
Because what happened in Southeast Asia is it's a little bit slightly different than what happened in here, like Western culture, like North America and Europe. There is a business model, sales, loot boxes. A lot of loot boxes have very low percentage of getting great items.
Yes.
And you can merge that great items, like for example, there's a +1 Excalibur and +1 Excalibur. You can merge them, so you can have +2 Excalibur or just lost everything. Yeah, that kind of business model.
So it's like introducing gambling on top of gambling.
Yeah,
it's double gambling.
Yeah, you pay to win based on pay to win, but pay to win if you luck.
Yes. Right. It's
so and just keep hearing me. There's a few companies and they earn $200 million per month because of these games.
Yeah.
Currently. So and also 85 or 9%, more than 85-90% of South Korean companies, they're addicted to this model. Right. So they just keep producing the same genres, especially RPG, because easy to make the kind of model work in that genre. So some people say it's just fine. There's nothing wrong with this. Companies should follow their profit. So that's wrong. And on the other hand, the people said it's just same as a gamble. So we should, make new regulation for that kind of games.
Right.
So what do you think? Do you think it's bad or just no problem?
I think it's a very difficult and very thorny problem to attack. Obviously, a market is a market, but I think that there are good reasons why gambling is heavily restricted in a lot of countries in the world, right? Like in the U.S., you can go gamble in Vegas, right, or in Reno. There's very specific places you can gamble. And the same laws don't apply to Indian reservations, so you'll find Indian casinos everywhere. But the reason that it's outlawed in other places and the reason that it's very, very heavily regulated is the same reason that you heavily regulate something like alcohol. If you have something that exploits human reward systems and behaviors, it's not fair to let a market determine that, right? Because people left to their own devices with like free gambling everywhere are going to engage in some really unhealthy behavior patterns, and those are hard things to resist, even for well-intentioned people. So I think it can be a real problem. And I think that drawing that line is where it gets tricky. How do you regulate it? Can you regulate it everywhere? Can I just download stuff off of a Korean store and gamble if I want, even if it's illegal in America, right? And I think these are problems that the gambling industry has been grappling with for a long time. And I think that probably we should take our cue from gambling websites and gambling regulations worldwide, right?
So do you think these kinds of games are just the same as gamble?
I think they're similar enough that we can take cues from what gambling laws there are, right? I wouldn't say it's exactly the same because gambling involves generally higher stakes and monetary returns as opposed to in-game returns. But I think that they're similar enough that I think we should take our cues from the gambling industry, and I think that probably some regulation should be put into place. Not necessarily everywhere all the time or in the same way, but especially as far as kids are concerned. Like if a kid gets on their dad's iPad and starts gambling in these games and spending real world currency, I don't know. I don't think that's a good pattern of behavior to establish when you're a kid. So
you mean a lot of countries should make the kind of regulation for this kind of games, right?
Yeah, I think I would like that. I don't know that it's feasible, and I don't know that people are going to, but I think that it's something as an industry we should be looking at. Because if you look at mobile companies that have been doing this, things like I don't know, there's tons of mobile games out there that use the same monetization strategy as the ones you're talking about, the very high cost loot crate sort of thing. And I have friends personally who've spent thousands of dollars on mobile games, and that's their prerogative, right? That's not up to me. But I do feel like it's a little squicky, I guess. It's thorny. It's something that I think better regulation could help with. And I think it's a direction that I would be sad if all games took, because it's the most profitable. Right?
Yeah, that's why I'm sad. That's why I'm here.
I think that maybe I'm a little biased because I develop games and because I don't I don't like the microtransaction model as a method of funding games. I think that it leads to bad design decisions. And so as a designer, if the game industry moves in that direction, that means I'm going to be forced to be making my games worse and harder and like less fun in order to encourage people to spend real money. And as a game designer, that really, I don't like, that really bothers me. I want to make an experience that's good and interesting and, you know, hopefully joyful, not one that is awesome for 10 minutes and then really unnecessarily hard so that you spend more money to get past it.
Right. So the reason I'm asking, you know, you guys consider that loot boxes in Overwatch or Star Wars, that kind of stuff's our problem, but in South Korea, it's just way different. like I say, the game earned $200 million per month.
Yeah,
it's insane.
That's a different level of problem.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of problem. So they're used that kind of news that, you know, ESRB in your country is like, they said loot box itself is not a gamble.
Right.
But it's just totally different than what happened in East Asia. So I just want to know, what do you think about this kind of issue? So
I think it's it's illustrative to look at the differences between sort of Western and Eastern philosophies on it. Because I think that games in the West took a very different direction for a long time, and companies in the West are just, over the last few years, picking up on the revenue that loot boxes can generate. And so I think for a long time you have people in positions of, you know, decision making with authority who don't like loot boxes because they want to build games that are rewarding of their own accord. Who, you know, it wasn't established. It didn't get in. But now it is. And so I think like EA putting loot boxes.
Oh, don't talk about EA. They're just saying with South Korea.
No. But I mean, I think that's a monumental shift for a Star Wars game to start including that sort of gambling behavior. I know it's not the first time that it's happened in a AAA game, but I think it's indicative that maybe the market is shifting direction in that way, and I would prefer if they started regulating it to prevent it from happening more.
Yeah,
right?
from my perspective, the loot boxes and Overwatch, then Star Wars, and like EA produced, it's not a problem, definitely.
Right.
But I think this kind of models in South Korea is the problem.
Yes, and I think that maybe the Western companies could look at that as a warning, right? Like as a warning, as like a possible dystopian future for their games, right? Where they are now, especially something like Overwatch, where you're not getting any in-game benefits out of it, it's just sort of cosmetic stuff. I don't really have a problem with that. I think that's actually really smart, right? There are people who will pay more money
more costumes
more costumes to differentiate their character. They like the way it looks. Like I have no problem with that because there's no
not affected the balance for the game.
You're not gambling with your ability to play the game. The game itself stands on its own as its own work of art, its own piece of balance and design and creativity, right? Like the game stays the same. You're not fundamentally changing anything about it with the loot boxes. They're just there to entice people who enjoy the game a lot to try and get creative with the way that they present themselves. But you can look at the South Korean model as like a dark alternate future for, you know, where
they're just sticking to the gamblers.
Right, where it's like if things sort of keep going the way they're going without any sort of regulation or oversight, I feel like maybe we will get there in the West in 10, 20 years. Everything will just be loot boxes everywhere. And I think that's bad. I think that it's bad not only for the people that get addicted and spend all of their money where they shouldn't. I think it's bad for games. I think it's bad for design. I think that there's a lot of stuff that can't be done in a game that requires that model of transaction that can be done in a different model. If you pay me a fair price for the game that I've built, I can build anything, right? I can build anything I want. I can come up with any experience that I think is interesting, and if there's a market for that experience, then I can get paid for that job. But if the company demands that we do loot boxes because they're more profitable, then I have to make certain design decisions fundamentally, systems-wise, that change it reduces the possible set of games we can make down to very narrow margins.
Yeah, really narrow, right.
And I think it's bad for the industry, it's bad for creativity. I mean, I think it's bad for the longevity of games as a service, right?
Oh God, what happened in South Korea exactly? All right. Thank you for answer. And 3 questions left. Really normal stuff, but important.
Okay.
So, what is the really important thing, most important thing in developing games?
You mean for
like
the
fun
for
or
the game itself?
Game itself.
The most important. Wow. I mean, that's a huge.
Should be
question.
fun, or should be like.
I mean, I think probably the most important thing in developing a game is that the people who are developing it have some emotional investment in the end product. And I think that if you look at something like the Mario franchise, right, which I don't know how they do it. Those guys manage to reinvent that franchise every few years, and it's always amazing.
Yeah.
And so I think that you can see that those developers have passion for the project they're on, that they're invested emotionally, that they're willing to take some creative risks and follow some rabbit trails that maybe other developers would shy away from because they're worried about the cost or development time. But I think if you have a passionate team, that's generally going to result in something hopefully that expands the space a little bit of games in general, that's not just following the same tropes. And I think that's great. That's the most important thing, is that the people who are making the game are as excited about it as the people who want to play it.
Yeah, exactly. Great answer. What is the best game of all time?
Oh,
you only need to pick one.
That's not a question that can be answered. One game, the best game of all time. I mean,
it's different for all and everybody.
There is no one best game. I mean, I think.
Just yourself, yeah. You think
it also depends on your mood, man. I mean, like my favorite MMO is World of Warcraft. Because it's something that I played during a time in my life where I had that amount of time to invest, right? And I don't really play it that much anymore because I'm old and I can't sit around for 20 hours every week raiding or collecting gear. But
that's totally playing. It's okay.
Yeah, but I think as there are probably MMOs out there now that have done more innovative things or that have taken directions that I might even have enjoyed more had I played them first. But since it was kind of my first love as an MMO, then it has a special place for me. That's not a question that can be answered, man. It's just not an answerable question.
That's why I'm asking. Fucking difficult. The Artin said, he said Zelda.
Zelda, okay.
And Olive said Biohazard 4, Resident Evil 4.
Okay. I mean...
Andrea said Half-Life 2.
Yeah, it depends on what's your criteria for best, right? Like, if you're looking for a game that inspired the most sense of wonder in me, I would probably say Shadow of the Colossus. If you're looking for a game that I spent the most time on, it'd be World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
If you're looking for...
By 100 hours? No, not 100. More than 100.
I mean, if you're looking for... There's just so many different answers you can give depending on the type of game you're looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, I even play old Super Nintendo games still that are I think objectively not amazing games. But the design constraints of the time made them simplify their decisions down to something that it's...
So your answer is WoW, World of Warcraft.
Yeah, definitely best game ever made.
Okay. There's final question. Okay. Any advice for the people who want to be a great game designer like you?
I mean, that's great game designer is a very subjective term.
Amazing.
But I would say if you want to get into making video games, and this isn't just for designers, this is for anybody who's passionate about it, maintain your passion for it. Don't get burned out. And then pick an angle of attack for getting into the industry and try it out. I think that there are a lot of people who love games who would actually not enjoy making games. And that's a hard thing to know until you try it out. So I would say for somebody who is unsure or somebody who thinks they might want to do it for a career, right now you are in the golden age of indie development. I mean, any of you guys out there, if you spend a few months picking up some basic programming techniques, if you spend a few months doing some tutorials, you can pick up Game Maker, you can pick up Unity, you can pick up Unreal. All these things are out there for free. They're all amazing tools that have different levels of, flexibility, portability. There is a game making tool out there right now, I promise you, for you, that is free, that you can utilize to make a project and see how it is to build something and see if it's something that you actually love. And if that's true, then you can take that thing that you've made and you can show it to someone else, and you can put it on a portfolio website, and you can start applying to internships, you can start applying to game making programs, or just companies in general. And if you put the time in and put the work in, you can have a career in games. You just, make sure that you like it first. And I'd say the best way to do it is just start making them. Just start making something. It doesn't have to be big. Just start making a project. And you will discover very quickly whether or not this is something for you. And if it is, then that will carry you as far as you want.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you for answering. That's it. That's all
right.
of it. Yeah. Thank you so much for your help.
Yeah.
with
Thanks
this
for having me. I'm sorry.
podcast.
I'm sorry. I know my answers are long. So
No, not wrong. Everything's fine. Yeah.
you are free to edit them down as much as you want. You are free to cut 90% of the interview. It's too long.
All right. Yeah. This was the interview one with Joe Grape.
Joseph Gent Graves is my
Joseph
full
Gent Grape.
name. Yes.
Yeah. So. Yeah. This is it. Goodbye. Say goodbye.
Bye, guys.